Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Onchain Summer Stories. This is a special one. I'm Jesse Pollak, your host, the creator of Base, and I'm joined by Brian Armstrong, the co-founder and CEO of Coinbase. Welcome, Brian.
What's up, Jesse? Good to see you.
Yeah, thanks for being here, and thanks for opting in to inspire builders in this conversation. I'd love to start from the beginning. You've been at the forefront of making crypto easy from the beginning. 10 years ago with Coinbase. I'm curious to hear from your perspective, like how far have we come? How accessible is on-chain for users today?
Yeah, well, we've come a long way, but I still think we have a long way to go. So back in the day, we were trying to think of just simple stuff like how do you send Bitcoin to an email address? That was like I remember back in 2012, we were hacking on the early prototype of Coinbase and it was like, that worked for PayPal. You send money to an email address. Like maybe we could do that for Bitcoin. Like we were just trying to solve the really basic, simple stuff. And even just the ability to have a username and password and have a simple way to store your Bitcoin so you didn't have to run your own node on your laptop. Like these were just the really basic things back in the day. But as we've moved along, I think we've made some good progress. Like instead of sending to these long addresses that look like passwords, we can send to ENS IDs now that are kind of like human readable instead of machine readable. That's good. Layer 2 is a huge deal. Obviously, Base was a big part of that, but there's lots of layer 2, Lightning, everything is like trying to make this easier. So we got to have faster confirmation times, lower fees. And then I still think we have a long way to go. So one of the big things I think about is that it's hard. I don't think like bridging assets between L1, L2, or maybe like different L2s. There's been some pretty funny memes on social media about this where it's like, do I have my USDC on ETH or is it on L2 this? And it's like, there's so many different icons. And I think we need to come up with some kind of way to get, that just to happen seamlessly in the background. So people don't even really know maybe even what L2 they're on. There's some kind of a handshake between, the sender and the recipient. It's like, here's what I've got. What do you accept? Some exchange on a DEX happens in the background. Maybe that kind of thing would help. I think even if you just like the bar in my mind is kind of like, Apple Pay, you can tap your phone on a device at a point of sale. How do we get to that level where you can do that between two phones or, at a point of sale device or in the digital, like an e-commerce context, scanning a QR code. And we've been in the Coinbase Commerce, we've been trying to get to this world of like, a one-tap magical checkout that's just like, how do you actually make crypto the easiest way to pay? We're still not quite there yet with the L2 stuff and, tapping into some of these APIs that are built into the hardware and phones, maybe for NFC and like, there's a lot of details to get right, but I think we're getting closer and it's going to take a lot of hard work by a lot of smart people.
Yeah, absolutely. And this summer, there's obviously a lot of people who are coming on chain to build, sometimes for the first time, sometimes, they've been here for as long as you. I'm curious, what are you excited to be seeing built in the on-chain summer build-a-thon and generally on chain right now?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things I have in mind that and by the way, I'm not like the arbiter of all these good ideas. I'm constantly impressed by the stuff the community is coming up with even more. But just a couple of the things I've been thinking about is that, you and I have often talked about these Lego pieces coming together, right? So it's like, okay, we've got ENS, we've got stable coins, we've got L2s, we've got like, so the pieces are starting to come together around identity and NFTs and social. So another piece of the puzzle that I feel like could be missing, something about reputation that's on chain. You could imagine a version of this that's like using the graph structure of the chain to sort of say, okay, if I trust this node and they sent money to this node, that sort of implies some amount of trust and kind of like a Google PageRank type algorithm. But that something like that could be cool to get built on chain. Another one I keep thinking about is that in Web 2, the biggest business model was ads, and we don't want to repeat all the sins of Web 2, but I do think how do you get distribution in Web 3 is an interesting one. And you could think of like, what is an ad network or Google AdWords equivalent? And you don't have to just do pay like CPC, like paying for a click or something. You could pay for an action, right? And so you could imagine a world where smart contracts or dApps are kind of exposing some sort of metadata that's like, hey, if you refer a user into this function call, pass your referral ID or your address and like you'll get 1% of it, and you can kind of advertise the different rates people are willing to offer, and sort of that could get surfaced in various wallets or areas of distribution. So I think we could see ad networks evolve on that dimension. I'll just throw out one other one I keep thinking about is like P2P on chain for on ramps and off ramps. And a lot of these emerging markets, we got to get funds on and off the platform, and these centralized versions of it keep getting shut down or pressured or whatever. And so if we could do that all on chain, like dispute resolution and mediation and rating and review systems, and like if the more we can build of that on chain, it'll actually be much more resilient and global in some of these markets that need it the most, right? So those are just a couple ideas I've been thinking about, but excited to see what people come up with.
I love all three of those. And I think one of the things that, has been so inspiring about getting to work with you is those have been things you've been thinking about and pushing on for a long time. And one of the things that's exciting to me is that it feels like before the technology was never ready. Like we didn't quite have the right pieces. The chains weren't cheap enough. We didn't have the kind of like ENS stuff. The wallets were too hard. But now it feels like we actually finally have those pieces. And it's going to enable that next wave of use cases where it's like, oh, now you can actually build the reputation or ads or on-ramps, and they're cheap enough and they're accessible enough that everyone can do them. So that was one thought I had hearing you say that. The other thought that I had is it's so interesting to hear and think about like how those things actually fit together. So like in order to have a good ad network, you need to know if the people who are participating and seeing the ads are like real people. And that's reputation.
Mm-hmm.
In order to have a good peer-to-peer network, you need to know, are the people in the peer-to-peer network good actors? And that's also reputation. And so I think where we're kind of in is the base infrastructure has been built on chain right now. But then we're starting to kind of see opportunities for this like application identity level infrastructure that's going to enable these use cases like peer-to-peer, like advertising, like better commerce, and I think going to help bring the world on chain. And I know you have been, increasingly hands-on in the Coinbase side on the making it easier for people to come on chain, both from a user perspective, but also more frequently and more recently from a developer perspective. I know you're an engineer yourself as well. Can you talk to us a little about like what is Coinbase doing right now to help developers, and kind of what's driving you to lean in there with your time and energy?
Yeah, well, if y'all haven't checked it out yet, you should go check out CDP, Coinbase Developer Platform. It's just cdp.coinbase.com. We're trying to really take a lot of the tools that we built internally at Coinbase and make them available to third parties to build your applications. There's a lot of stuff we had to build over the years, whether it's like easy ways to store crypto, staking, trading, but even just like indexing a bunch of NFTs or how to work with ENS or different assets. And hopefully we can take a lot of that work off people's plates and just make them available through really easy to use APIs. Jesse, you put out a really great video kind of walking through a lot of the on-chain builder tools. And so we've got base nodes in there and paymaster stuff where you can, pay make the fees just totally a non-issue for your customers. And obviously like the smart wallet launch we did yesterday was a really big deal too. I think we're now seeing it's just so much easier for users to onboard to these apps without having to have some 12-word phrase that they have to put in a password manager, hopefully, or worst case scenario, they just put it in a text notepad or something. So now, with biometrics, YubiKeys, like people can just kind of one tap get these wallets, and the onboarding has just gotten way better. The way that fees get paid has gotten a lot lower friction. So I'm pretty passionate about that. I think Coinbase has a big opportunity to help thousands of developers build apps, which is partly why I've kind of been diving in on this Coinbase Developer Platform CDP product and trying to see where we can make that easy to use. And as a developer, I loved these magical moments where you fire up I remember like the first time I went through the Ruby on Rails demo or whatever, where it was like, I'm going to make a blog in 5 minutes. And, they coded up with like live comments and RSS feeds and all this stuff. I'm like, wow. I'd been coding Java and these crazy things for years. And I was like, this is a whole new level of productivity. So occasionally you have these magic moments. We're hoping that we can provide a bunch of those tools for developers to just get started easier, lower the barrier to do innovation.
Yeah, I totally agree. And if folks don't know, Brian, he was an engineer when he started Coinbase, and he's still an engineer today. We had a 3-day weekend the other day. It was, I think, Memorial Day. And I got a ping from Brian on Sunday that was like, hey, what's the best way to start learning how to write smart contracts? And I sent him a couple of resources, and then we were messaging again. He was like, hey, like, could we like do some pair programming? And he joined up with Wilson Cusack, who's been working on the smart wallet, and they spent their holiday pair programming, writing smart contracts. And I think the fact that you have like the CEO of a public company like Coinbase leading in and like learning how to write smart contracts, making the developer tooling better. It's been so inspiring for me getting to like be a part of the developer team at Coinbase. And I think it's having a massive impact, because if you look at where we were even a year ago, I don't think anyone thought that Coinbase was doing anything with developers. And now Base is the leading L2 from developers. The Coinbase developer platform, if you haven't checked it out, is an incredibly powerful developer toolkit. You can go in there and get everything you need to start building on chain. And we're just getting started. I think a lot of where that actually comes from is that we have a leader in Brian who's an engineer and who gets it and like can be on the ground writing code and making it happen. So it makes me really happy.
Yeah. Thanks for saying that, Jesse. I feel like my coding chops get a little worse every year, but my CEO chops hopefully get a little better every year. And then mostly I'm doing it to try to lead by example. And I gotta go in there and try to understand the basics of it. And like, you know, everybody, it's intimidating to go in and try to learn any new language or way of building apps or just any, you know, it's complicated stuff. So you kind of have to go in with that beginner mind and get humbled over, you know, I had to ask a lot of dumb questions. But shout out to Wilson Cusack helping me on some pair programming. That was cool. And it's kind of like, you know, in Singapore, some of the officials have, I think that former PM had a GitHub account or something like that. He had written some kind of thing. So it's, you know, if you go try to understand the basics, it does show good leadership in the company. I think we need every engineer at Coinbase to be building on chain. So if I'm not leading by example, I don't see how I can ask other people to do it.
100%. And your example is being seen and felt, and it's changing the company, because just like we didn't really have that many developer products a year ago, there wasn't that many parts of the company that were building on chain a year ago. But today, there's so many different teams across Coinbase who are building on chain, and there's so much kind of improvement in the way we're building on chain. And we actually have an internal goal right now on the kind of like Base plus, you know, other parts of the engineering team, where we say we're going to build the best smart contract on-chain engineering team in the world. And I think a year ago, if you'd asked us that and said, "Hey, is like Coinbase can do that?" We'd been like, "No way, like impossible. This is crazy." But today, it feels like we're getting there. We actually are pushing the limits of what's possible and kind of setting an example for ourselves and for the teams internally, and for, I think, the broader ecosystem of how a big company can level up their ability to build on chain. I'm curious, as we look to the next few years, you know, the next 1 to 3 years, how do you see the on-chain future shaping up? How quickly do you see this all happening?
Well, I think these things always feel very gradual while you're in it, but if you look back, they look sudden, right? Like, people think of the iPhone moment as like, oh, it was this sudden inflection point. And like, from a historical point of view, that's true. But when people were right in the middle of it, it didn't really feel that way. You know, the iPhone was introduced, and even like it didn't have an app store or anything for like a year or two. And it was on like only AT&T on one 3G network, you know? So it actually felt very gradual while you were in it, in the middle of it. And only in hindsight do we look back on these things. So I think we're in one of those inflection moments, but it's going to feel gradual while we're in it. Like, you know, L2's huge deal, just opens up the space of different applications that can get built now that the friction is so much lower. But yeah, I think over the next few years, I don't know, one thing I've just been thinking a lot about is how do all these decentralized protocols come together in kind of an on-chain super app, you know? I mean, we've got to have that sort of, you know, Netscape or iPhone type moment where it's not just with like payments, right? I mean, we're seeing decentralized social have a moment with Firecaster. We're seeing interesting messaging applications like XMTP come online. So how do we just get this embedded into people's daily lives? Like, how is it the way they earn a living, how they pay for basic necessities, how they just operate their daily life? And, you know, of course, like content creators, like social media, you know, journalism could be influenced by this. You know, even the way that people, of course, like just create organizations and have voting and governance. So I think that's really exciting. And if we can have that, I think you know, there could be like an on-chain super app that tries to tie together a bunch of these protocols, which would be really fun. So I don't know, we might have to look at that.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to see what you're cooking. It definitely feels like there's all of this infrastructure that's come together, but the user experience hasn't really brought it together yet. Like they haven't quite connected those pieces, and it feels like there's an opportunity there. So I'm excited to keep building the developer side and the builder side and see what Coinbase keeps cooking on the consumer side. Okay, so last question from me. We are in the Build-a-thon. Lots of people. There's, I think, like thousands of builders who signed up for the Build-a-thon who are going to be building all summer. You're obviously a incredibly successful founder. You've been doing this for a long time. I'm curious, what's your advice for developers and folks who are building in this Build-a-thon?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the early stages of innovation, they don't look glamorous, it's just a few people tinkering around in their apartment or whatever. And that's exactly how Coinbase started. And a bunch of other ideas that I tried in the past that didn't really work very well. So that's the norm. I remember my friends would be calling me and like, hey, come out to this party. And, and I was like, I don't know, I'm just kind of at home by myself tinkering on my laptop. But it didn't feel like I was changing the world. And in fact, most of the time I was just banging my head against the wall trying to solve some bug. I had like the semicolon in the wrong spot or whatever, proverbially. So a lot of innovation is like that. It's power through it, like give yourself permission to be a beginner and be slow and not understand how it works. Like if you're on the frontier, there's not going to be a lot of like how-to manuals. I think you can go learn how to make an LLM in 5 minutes or whatever. But like, if you're trying to really build something new, that stuff doesn't exist. And so you are going to have to persist through that. Like determination is probably the biggest determinant of success in entrepreneurship and in building in general. I think a lot of startups, a couple people get together, they try something, and after 3 months, like the first thing they shipped didn't work. Or maybe they have some kind of like, co-founder fight amongst themselves and they just kind of blow up on the starting line. And from my point of view, like nothing ever works with that approach. Like almost nothing works the first time you put it out. Like that's incredibly rare. Coinbase certainly didn't work the first thing I put out. It's basically, you just have to put out a really embarrassing V1, ship something that is not really ready. If you're not embarrassed by it, you waited too long. A lot of people just never ship because they can't get over the hurdle of putting out something they're a little embarrassed by. And then once you have your V1 out, nobody cares, post it on Farcaster or whatever, get 10 people to go look at it. You then kind of have to just go through this loop of like, talk to customers, improve the product, talk to customers, improve the product. And then just do that for like 2, 3, 4, 10 years, whatever. And eventually something might break through. And that is the game of entrepreneurship. You don't really know if it's going to work or not. You have to be willing to step into the unknown. And the people who persist and try enough ideas eventually get something to work. And 99% of people give up or they never start in the first place. And so that's how you do it.
I love it. And I think that's a great note to end on. If you're building, don't give up. You're just at day one. And the most important thing is staying determined, staying focused, keeping your eye on the ball, and staying based. So Brian, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for being a part of Onchain Summer Stories, and have a great rest of your day. See you, everyone.
Thanks, Jesse.